Hello and welcome. In this video, we'll be looking at some of the tricks I used in the making of that animation. Now, none of the techniques I used were particularly complex or advanced, just simple techniques to achieve simple results that I think in the end are quite effective. So let's jump in and see where to begin. So because I already kind of knew the angle that the book will be viewed in the animation, I used that to just kind of direct how I went about laying out the UVs of the book. So as you can see on the back end, the backside isn't really textured. So I just focused on the parts where the book would be visible in the shot. And because I also kind of wanted the motion in the animation I wanted them to happen in different directions. So you can see the cover is going up, and on the side of the book it's going down. I went about this by creating two separate UVs on the same object, so that one would have an animation in one direction. Yeah, so that the two animations could be kind of detached. So to do that, I'll just come into this fresh blend file, and you can get this blend file on Gumroad for free. As you can see, the book model isn't particularly complex. It's not the best model out there, but it's simple enough that it works for what I want. So I'll just come here into the UV editing tab, and then I will just bring this in right there. And we'll start with the front page. So with the face mode selected, I'll select the front face, and then I'll just make sure I have, because I can see right here, I don't want the texture to cut off at that point. So I'll make sure to grab all those faces around there, grab those faces there, make sure I have that and that. Then I'll come into UVs and unwrap. You can see what we have then. Just so we can see what that looks like, I'll go into the shading tab, and then I'll add a new material. Add a new texture, and then just set that texture to cover. And we'll see what that looks like. So we'll jump back into the UV editing tab and set this to rendered view, and you can see what we have. So I'll just adjust my UVs over here. I will set my cursor to 2D cursor so that it's centered to there, and then scale this in the x-axis, just like that until perfect. So just like that, we've textured the front face. And what else is there? Oh yeah, because we'll be animating this moving upwards. So if you just go into edit mode and select the whole thing, we've just unwrapped the front face. And if you go into the, what's this called? The data, object data properties under UV map, you'll see when you unwrapped, a UV map is created there. And that kind of just textures that front face. And then next thing I'll do is I'll separate the pages. So I'll come and select these faces over here. Maybe select them like this, like that. And then I'll add a new material and select assign, just so that those pages have a separate material. And if you wanted to, you could go into some detail and find a texture with this section of a book and create that texture for that. But I think for what I was going for, the animation over here and at the side kind of just draws the attention. So in the final animation, I didn't have a material. I didn't go into detail texturing this part, but I don't think it took away from the final result. But if you feel so inclined, you could just jump in and go ham with that. So with that, we have two materials on the same object. We have the front cover done. We have the pages done. But now we want to have a material for this part. We want to texture this part. And we want to do it in such a way that we can animate the two separately. And so if we go into the animation tab, the shading tab, and where are we? Select that material. So how we animate that texture going upwards is using this mapping node over here. And then in the location, just play around with the Y. And that creates that animation. But because we want the texture that will be here to be animated separately, so what I'll do is I'll go into the UV editing tab, and then under the object properties, I will create a new UV map so that whatever we start UVing will be stored in this second map. So we can just maybe call this the cover. Then we can call this the side. Then let's just turn this one off and look at this one. So here I will just select these faces, make sure I have these two, then make sure I have these. And then I can just come here and say unwrap that, and then I have those faces nicely. I'll do something like that. But you'll notice that we don't exactly have a texture. Say if I wanted to do something like this, median point. If I rotated this in the x-axis by 90 degrees and tried to align this here, you'll see we kind of have this repeating problem. So we'll have to, what I did was I created a custom texture for this part. So I'll just leave it like that, and then I'll go UV, export UV layout, and export that there. And I usually do my texturing in Inkscape. So I'll just bring in that UV map I just exported, which is this one. I'll hit Control-Shift-R so that the page is automatically set to the dimensions of the texture I imported. And then I'll bring in that the cover of the USDJ. And then what I'll do is I'll create a face, create a rectangle, and then make sure it covers those dimensions. I'll hit page down so that I can see the actual UV page. And then I'll select this one. And what I want is to somehow take this text over here and realign it so that it fits this side of the page. I'll hit Shift, Alt, and B in Inkscape. And what that does is it opens this trace bitmap panel in Inkscape. And what this does is if you play around with the dimension, it takes the pixels from your image and extracts them as vectors. And I find vectors for something like this are a lot easier to manipulate. So with that, play around with the sliders. I think this is nice. It has enough detail, it's readable, and I'll just hit apply. And you'll see what that does is it extracts all that text as a vector. But I don't need much of these. I will delete that. What else? I will maybe make this smaller. And then do that. Then have that. So you can just be creative with it, with how you want to design that part. But I think for the purposes of example, that's good enough. And then I'll come here, hide the images so that I can just have these textures, and then I'll export this and bring it into Blender. Now, back inside Blender, we have our texture brought into Blender. It's mapping there nicely. But to see its effect on the actual mesh, we'll also have to bring the texture inside the shading tab and apply it there. So in the shading tab, we now have two options. So we want to have this texture in the front treated differently in animation, moving upwards. And we want to have the other texture on the side moving downwards. So we can either do this by creating two separate materials here and that look similar, and then treat them, animate them separately. Or we also have the option of bringing in both textures within the same material and do that. So let's try doing it within the same material. So we have our earlier texture, which is this one, which is the cover, and it looks like this. And this is using our fast UV. So to just see clearly what we are doing, I will delete this texture coordinate and bring in search and say UV and bring in the UV map. So this node allows us to say which UV map to use where. So if you click here, you'll see we have our two options. So I'll select the cover and plug it right there. And you see what that does. And so I'll select these two nodes and Shift D and duplicate them. I'll duplicate this one too. And then here I'll say side. So we are telling it use the side UV on this top texture. And then I'll say use the side texture, and we'll see what that looks like. And so something funny is happening here. It is mapping it to the side, but there's something happening here. So let's go back to the UV editing tab. So right now I'm selecting only the side faces. So that's what we are seeing here. So if I select all the faces by hitting A, you'll see that when we duplicated the UV, it brought in the UV in the first one into the second one, and then added the changes that we made on the side. So what we want is these faces here. So I'll just select, deselect everything, and then I'll highlight everything in the viewport. And then here on the side, I will hit L on the UV of the front page. And then what I'll do is just scale this all the way down to a place where it won't be visible. And because I know I'll be translating this texture vertically, I want to place this somewhere where the text will not be visible, because you can see what that happens if we move it above the text. So I'll just place it somewhere like there, where I know if I translate this texture vertically, the black pixels won't come on top of this part of the UV. So it's just kind of clunky UV mapping. It's not the most elegant solution, but it works. So that's the side UV, and now you can see what we have there. Nice. So I'll go back into the shading tab, and then here we now want to mix these two textures. We have the front page right there, and we have the wait. Where's the front page? The cover. Yeah, right there. Then we have the side right there. So what I'll do is Shift A, color, mix color, and then we want to mix these two nodes, and then plug this into the base color and complete that there. Nice. But I noticed there's something clunky happening here. There's this black vertical line. I don't know what's happening there. Let's go and investigate. We'll go into the UV editing tab. Okay, so we have, so I guess I missed selecting some faces when I was UV mapping. So I'll make sure I select these two, and then make sure I have these two. Then I'll select the rest. Make sure I have those, and I'll UV map this again. Hit U, and then unwrap. Then I can just select that and move it in the x-axis and place it where I want it. Just like that. Right, did I miss more faces? I'm not sure what's happening here. Okay, so what I'll do here is add an edge loop and then just move this edge loop down. And that moves that like that. Okay, so back in the shading. We want to mix these two textures. We have the face and we have the side. And then what do we use? Let's use multiply. Multiply and set this all the way to 1. And I think that works. So if we go there, we see that we have both our textures mapped the way we want them. And so now in the y-axis, if we can animate this independently of this other one, and then that's just that's the trick there. And one more thing, just to add a little bit of detail to the texture, I want to add a bit of noise to the texture of the book, just so that when we animate the text, okay, let me just do it so that it's easier to explain it as we do it. I want a noise texture, and then I will add this to the roughness. And what I like to do is add a color ramp. So that's converter, color ramp, add that there. Now that's the clamp, converter, color ramp. Set that to that and set that to roughness. And then I'll set this to B-spline because I think the gradient is a lot smoother. And then I'll play with this, play with the roughness. Come here, add a bit of detail. I like to add the roughness all the way, add the detail in the roughness, just like that. And the reason I'm doing this is because when I start animating the texture, you will see that the text, the font printed on the book is moving, but the material and the reflection on the surface is stationary. So I think that kind of just adds the illusion of, it adds something interesting to that illusion. It's like the text, the movement is happening in the book and not on the book, which I think is really cool. So yeah, so that's how we do the book. Now, this part of the project was really, really fun because it was my first time playing around with the viewport compositor in the form that it exists today. Everything was real time in the viewport, which made the process a lot more iterative, which made the process a lot more fun. So kudos to the Blender devs. So for this part, I have this texture, which I made in Inkscape. It's all those Urbit planets and stars and galaxies. And I just went and manipulated that texture to create a pattern that covers the whole surface of the table. So I'll just begin by bringing this into Blender in a new project file. I'll go into the UV editing tab, and then I will bring in the texture and drop it in there. And I'll just manipulate this cube into a tabletop that fits that texture. I'll say scale this in the x-axis, something like that. Scale this in the y-axis. Right, yeah, y and x-axis, something like that. something like that, and then scale this in the z-axis so that it's flat, something like that. Then I'll just add a bevel by hitting Control B and something like that. Then I'll just, in face mode, select that top face. First, I'll go into object mode, and then I will apply the scale. Let's just apply rotation and scale, actually just all transforms. And then I'll go into edit mode with the top face selected, because this is the face that we want to cover this entire texture. I'll select that face, hit U, then unwrap. Then I can select this, GX, move it to something like that. So you can see I kind of made my desk a bit wider. So I'll select this and the x-axis, something like that. Go into edit mode, apply or transform, unwrap that again, and we have, it's a bit better. Now it doesn't cover the perfectly like in the final render. It doesn't, there's a bit of a gap here, but for demonstrations purposes, I think this will work. Okay, so I'll go into the shading tab, and then I will bring in that texture into the material. That's that. Okay, so that works. So the idea is this texture will only operate as a mask. We'll just be using it as a mask to mask out other textures that we'll be using underneath and animating to create this kind of mycelial growing type effect. So first, I just want to make sure that this texture will only be operating on this top side, and to go into edit mode, Control I, select everything, and then I'll just create a new material and assign it there. And then I just make sure that's black, just like that, so that the texture is only on the top surface. Now, let's see. So what we want to do is use a noise texture. And that was actually a wave texture. Let's go texture, and then with the wave texture there, and see what that looks like. So that's what that looks like. And I'll hit Control T so that I can get those mapping nodes, just so that I can manipulate the direction of the wave. So I will turn the rotation of the Y, no, the X, the Z, yeah. The Z, I'll turn the Z by 90 degrees so that it's facing that direction. I will increase the scale, something like that. That should do for now. And then what else do I want to do? Well, let's play around with these. I want to use a triangle wave. No, a saw wave. Exactly, so that one part of that front is really, really sharp, and the other one kind of fades off. And the sharp part will kind of act as the front part of that wave. Next thing I want to do is play with the distortion. And I'll do something crazy, something like that. Yeah, until something like this pops up, so that it kind of breaks. You can see in the animation, if you look closely, there are places where the lights in that pattern are kind of popping up randomly. They're not really part of like that moving wavefront. And I think it just breaks up the uniformity of the pattern. The other thing I'll do is crank up the detail also, Yeah, something like that. Let's play with the scale of the detail. Let's do, yes, something like that. Also increase the scale again, because I want some distance between those wave fronts. So I'll do something like that. Then, okay, let's just put these together so that we can see clearly what exactly we're doing. Okay, so this is the texture, and this is the noise. What we want to do is we'll say add color, mix color. Let's mix these two, and then let's see what will work. Let's crank this all the way. Let's see, let's try multiply. Not exactly. Let's try darken. No. Let's try. I know we don't want to use these because this will just make all of them. Okay, that's actually not so bad. Let's see. Let's see multiply. And then let me move this into the factor. And then I will add a color ramp in there. And then now I can play around with the gradient of this texture. What's happening? Oh, the gradient is in the wrong texture, sorry. The color ramp should be in here. And that goes there. Exactly. So, and then I'll move this to B-spline because that gradient is a lot smoother. Then now we can play around with this texture to exaggerate or reduce that fading effect in our texture. Or you could even just flip that entirely so that you change that direction. Okay. But let's go with this. And then let's see what's here. Let's plug this here. See what that looks like. Okay, so we kind of have that, the opposite effect. Yeah, that's more like it. All the factor, make sure the factor is all the way there. So now if we drag this back, you can either reduce or increase the patterns, how visible the patterns are. And if you play around with the phase, you can kind of have that texture moving across the table. So this is what that looks like. And then if you play with the phase, you just have that moving across. Real nice. And you want the planets that are in the parts of that pattern that are in the white part to be visible. And that becomes kind of like your wavefront, creating that growing effect. And it's the distortion. You can play around and increase or reduce the distortion. And that's what creates that kind of randomized direction as the pattern becomes visible. Plug that there. So just play around with the phase. You can see what that looks like, which is real nice. I'll increase the scale because I don't want them to be so close together. So the closer to 0, the larger the texture, and you can go, the more you go in the negative direction, the smaller that distance and the other side. So I want to go something closer and closer to 0, something like that. Now if I play around with that, it looks real nice. Let's see what that looks like. Nice. Nice. Let's distort that further, see what that looks like. Yeah, okay. Okay, so we'll plug this into the factor and see what that looks like. Really cool. So we want this pattern to be emissive. So instead of plugging it into the base color, I want to plug it into the emission. I'll take this, plug it into the emission. I'll turn that all the way down to black so that if we increase the strength, we can start seeing that pattern coming through there, which is really cool. So now to add some color into this pattern, we will do that using this color ramp. So I'll go here. I want let's use blue. I want like a really bright blue to be at the front, and then back here I want a darker blue. Then we'll add another one. Then back here I want black. So you'll see how that fades in there. And that front, the bright ones to be not so many, so I'll tighten that up. Yeah, something like that. Feel free to play around with colors that you think look cool. And then, yeah, so move this around and you have that. Nice. So let's go play around with the compositor. And this is where it starts getting really, really fun. So let's find a nice angle there. Let's make a render image. So you have this render. Let's jump into the compositor. So inside compositing, I'll click use nodes so that we can see our nodes there. And then actually before we do that, I need to go into the view layer and check a few boxes. I want an emission. Yeah, I think I'll just do the emission. So when we check that box, you'll see a new option pops up here, and we'll need to do our render again so that we can see that information there. So now we have something we can start working with. And what I want to do is have those streaks. It's like we really want to give this animation the feeling like that energy is coming from inside the desk out into the world. So those kinds of streaks that are going vertically upwards. So just to spruce up this image a little bit, let's zoom in just a bit there. I will take, so we have the image, we have the alpha, we have the emission. I'll say Shift A and then go into filter. I want a glare node. The first thing I'll do, I want to give this the emissive material a bit of a glowing effect so that we can kind of give it like the energy, more life. Plug that there. I'll go into, say, high quality, and then set that to bloom. Then if we look at that, we can see what that looks like, which is starting to look really nice already. So if we play around with the threshold, with the mix at -1, it's the original image. At 0, it's half between the glow and the original image. And then if we go all the way to 1, we just have just the glow. And then you can play around with the threshold to reduce or increase just how much of the pixels, bright pixels in the original image get added to the bloom. So I'll say Shift A, color, and mix color so that we can see what that looks like. And set that to add. And that's what we have. So that's starting to look nice already. Maybe I'll turn up that threshold so that I can have the really bright pixels at the forefront. Then another thing I'll do is, let's see, I want a sunbeams. I'll go to filter, then sunbeams. Then I'll take this emissive material, emissive pass, add it right there. If I select that, that's the center of our sunbeam. And if we increase that ray length, you'll see the effect that that has on our image. So this X sign is the center of where the rays seem to be cast from. And because I want to have them seem like they're coming from the bottom of the table, I'll just take this, select that, grab this. Wait, what's happening? Oh yeah, select the sunbeams, grab this, and I want to pull it all the way down here. And remember, this effect is happening in the, I don't know if they call it screen space, but it's just happening within the frame of this final render. It has no information about the 3D scene itself. So you have to be careful how you use it, because there are ways in which the effect can break, and we're going to see that in a bit. I'll reduce the ray length so that it's not too crazy. Something like that. Then before I mix that in, I also want to add another glare. And then let's see, I'll turn the threshold down. Okay, maybe that's too much, something like that. Maybe set this to fog. Does that do much? Yeah, kind of. Set this to 0. Maybe I'll just keep the bloom. And I noticed the bloom is, it didn't used to be here. Maybe when they updated Eevee, it used to be here in this panel. But now it's moved here. It's a new option here. So I'll use it. Maybe turn up the threshold, something like that. So you have the first one, which just adds a glowing effect to the kind of like the front of the wave. And then we took another emission. We're extracting these sunbeams from the emission pass. We are passing it through a glare node to give it that effect. And then we want to add it to the previous glow, like this, so that we have that. It's this glow and the sunbeams have been added together. So you can see the original, the final, and then we add that to the final image, and we kind of have that. So this is nice. It's cool. This was possible doing this all inside the compositor. But the cool thing is, if we go back to, let's say, the shading tab, and then here in the, let's go to the final render view. And then here under in the viewport shading, under the compositor, let's go to always. So we can now see all those effects that we added in the compositor in real time inside the viewport, which is just super, super, super cool. And if we play around with this, you can see the effect is just, it's just there. You can just see it. Really, really cool. So now if we go back in and say we wanted to change the colors in here, let's say I want a purple, something like a purple there, and something like this blue here. The whole thing just updates the whole tree seamlessly. And even if we had, let's say we add an animation here. Let's say we we place a keyframe in the phase. This is where we animate that wavefront. I've placed a keyframe under the phase. Then I'll go into my animation tab. Let's set this to the graph editor. And okay, let's set this to shader editor so that I can get access to that keyframe. Where is it? Right there. And then I'll go into the modifiers and add a generator. And let's see what this does in the final view. So I'm just adding an animation. I'm adding a slope to this value so that the animation is automated essentially. So if you just hit play, it's a bit too fast. You point it in the opposite direction. Then inside the viewport here, let's set that to always. And then it just works. It's like magic. It's just Blender devs. Good job. This effect, remember, it doesn't have any information about the 3D space of the world. It's only happening inside the compositor, which only knows the X and Y axis of your image. So the places where it breaks, for example, is if I move here to the top view, you'll see the direction of those sunbeams. It kind of breaks. It doesn't follow the scene. So you have to be careful how you use it. If I go in this direction, you'll see that it goes, yeah, it's using the screen space. I think that's what they call it. I'm not sure. It's using the screen space rather than the 3D space. So when you're using effects like these, mixing the effects from the 3D world and the compositor, you kind of have to be careful and be clever about how you go about it so that the effect doesn't break. So then lastly, maybe to just, similarly with how we did with the book, I want to add some detail to the surface of the desk. So I'll come here and in the roughness, pull that out, and then I'll add a noise texture. And it's kind of already visible. I'll scale this, something like that. I'll add detail. Then I'll add roughness. That's looking better already. Just playing around with these values. And the idea is to kind of make the surface of the table a lot more visible so that when the animation underneath is happening, there's kind of this illusion where whatever is happening, the energy is coming from inside the table. Like the effect is not happening on the surface, but inside it. And then whatever is happening inside it is coming in through that surface into the world. And I think that just ties the effect together a lot more neatly. So I can add a color ramp somewhere there. Set this to B-spline. Then play around with that until you have something like that. Maybe I'll hit Control-T on that noise texture just so I can have more options on the mapping. If I set that to object, yeah, the texture appears a lot less stretched out. So I think that looks just really, really nice. So yeah, so that's it for the desk. I have here a custom texture pack of some futuristic looking coins that I designed in Inkscape. And if you look to the left in the layers panel, you'll see each design has 2 folders inside it. And one contains the design of the coin and the other the text. So I just separated that to kind of make it flexible and customizable. And you can purchase this texture pack on Gumroad. It's one way to support what I'm doing. So if I open, say, the text for the first coin, and let's just zoom in. So I have the design in one folder and the text in the other. And if I open the text, let's turn that off a bit. You'll see inside the text, there are two layers. There's the text and there's a path. And if I make the path visible, you'll see there's a circle. And this is what I'm using to place the text around. So you can just select the text in there. And then say just customize it and add your own. Just like that. So it's just a resource that has helped me whenever I need to make something coin related. So I'll just go ahead and export this one and bring it into Blender and play around with it. And something else that I actually like to do that's worth mentioning is, so I have all these templates inside my SVG file, and I export these once I've customized it to my liking. I export it and take it out. And I have here a folder with a bunch of logos that you could potentially just bring there, place that there, and export it and use it however you want. But I don't like to kind of bake the logo inside the texture as I export it. What I like to do is export the logo as a separate thing, and then I'll add them together inside my Blender shader, because I think that way I have a lot more flexibility with what I can do inside Blender. So this is what I have inside Blender. We jump to the shader editor, you can see what we have. And this is my shader setup. I'm just using that texture, passing it through a color ramp here to kind of make it more or less increase or reduce the contrast. Let's say could do that there, to just kind of customize further tweak the texture so that you're not just stuck with the colors from the texture you exported. And then could actually delete this and this, just bring this directly into the base color. Yes. Oh no. Oh yes. Something like that, or something like that. You could flip the colors back and forth to just customize the look of your effect. Then I'm taking this. Down here, I have a noise texture, which is what gives that kind of roughness to the surface of the coin. And then I'm going to take this texture, plug it into a bump node, and then that bump node goes into the normal of the principal shader, and that's what gives us the bump effect. So without having to model directly all those details inside the coin, we can just use that texture to kind of fake that effect. So we want this to go into the height, not the normal, into the height. Yeah, and then that's that. And then you also have further the ability to invert the bump inside this bump node. So you can either have the text either embossed or engraved, but I think I like this. So yeah, that's just the simple shader setup. And yeah, something else that I also like doing with this is I can come in here. If I don't like a silver coin, say I wanted a gold coin, I could just tweak the colors in here. So let's say I want something like that. And here, something like that. Yeah, so you have the ability to get in there and tweak the colors. If you wanted something more bronze-like, if you wanted something more copper looking, you could play with the colors in here. But for now, I think I'll just go with the silver. That's pretty much it for the design of the coin. I think the only other thing is the animation of the coins coming out of the screen. So let's see how it did that. So I'll just create a new plane, something like that. Let me set the selected outline, Rx by 90. So this will just act as the display inside the original animation. So I'll select this plane we've added, and then I want to add, maybe I'll turn this off so that I'm not placing keyframes all over the place. I will add a particle system. So I'll come here into the particles panel, add a particle system, and then just play. So maybe I'll reduce the number of frames so that I can have something manageable. Okay, so let's just adjust the behavior before we select the coin as the object to be used as the particle. So I'll go down here into physics, or maybe into, first thing is the field weights, and then I'll turn off the gravity. So I do not want gravity. That's first. And then maybe turn down the number of particles to 15. I don't need that many. And then I want these, because it's like the cube that's entering into one of the screens and then another one is popping out on the opposite side. It's like that cube popping out. I want the particles to come out with like the momentum of that cube. So I'll go into velocity. First of all, I'll set the frame. So here it's trying to create these 15 particles over 200 frames. So I'll set this to something like 5. So that we now have all the 15 particles being produced in the first 5 frames. Then I can extend the lifetime maybe. What else? Okay, we can now go into the render and select the coin as the object. So that's kind of working. Maybe, what if I wanted it to point to move in the other direction? So the positive Y. Say if I went here into the normal, I could just maybe flip this by 180 degrees. Just like that. Then let's play with the rotation. Check rotation. Check dynamic. And then I'll increase the angular velocity so that the coins start to spin slowly as they come out, which is nice. I can tweak the phase and then randomize the phase so that they're not all spinning uniformly. So that's starting to look nice. Maybe set up some lights so that the coins can see them better. Extras. I will create a point light somewhere there, so that we can kind of just see the coins better. Okay. Let's go back there and hide the extras. So what else? We have the coins spinning nicely. So maybe I'll go into the viewport just for performance's sake. Have the coins spinning nicely. So the next thing we want is to kind of create that momentum. We want them to have like a bit of speed when they're coming in and then slow down gradually. So let's scroll down and see what we can play with. So I'll go into the physics tab. And these two were the primary settings that I played around with mostly. So let's see what happens when we turn up the drag. Let's turn it up even more. Yeah, I don't see much changes. Let's see what happens when you turn up the dump. Okay. Okay, so that's something starting to happen. So when we turn up the dump, they come out and then they start slowing down. And when the dump is at 0, they just keep moving. So we'll start playing here. Okay, so for any value of dump, the coins eventually come to a stop. It's just a matter of how far from the initial point do they come to a stop. So maybe I'll come into the emission and increase the lifetime so that we can see that better. So what I want to do is to kind of have that, I'll have a small value of dump at the beginning so that they come in and start slowing down. But then I'll animate the dump to 0 so that they don't slow down to a halt. So they'll start at some velocity, and then as the value of dump goes down, whenever the dump reaches 0, the coins will continue with the velocity at that point until they die. So let's see. Now, at 0, I will place a keyframe there, and then come to some place like here, and then turn that to 0. Let's see what that does. So yeah, something like that. But then I still want that initial velocity to kind of feel a bit more explosive. So I'll come into the velocity, and in the normal, I'll try increasing this a bit. See what that looks like. That's much better. Much better. I'll increase the phase. In the rotation, I'll increase the angular velocity so that they can be spinning a bit more. That's too much. So I could also animate the angular velocity so that they start with an initial high spin and then slow down to some constant value. So at 0, let's just have it at 9. And then by the time they're here, let's turn that down to something like 2 or something. Play that. Yeah, and I like how that looks. You could also add some randomization here in the object velocity so that the coins kind of have exactly nice. So it feels a lot more explosive because they're moving in different directions. So I'll just set that to something like that. And yeah, I think that's all I did for animating the coins. But the coin that you see coming in towards the camera, that one was hand animated to have that effect. So I think that's it for me for this video. Let me know if you learned something from this video. You can find me on my socials. You can comment in the comment section. And I'll see you guys in the next one.
This pain I'm trying to soothe, yeah. It's time to seek the truth, yeah. It's high time. It's been dark for a long time. I gotta free from this paradigm.